It definitely is recording this week, Pete. And how are we going to introduce the podcast? Are you going to do another one of your toe-curling and horrendous introductions that everybody hates?
What do you mean another one? I'm not going to do anything this week because every introduction I do, you say no one will like that. And sure enough, in the comments, everyone always says, that was a terrible introduction. Why don't you just do something with composure and decorum? So, hello, everyone. This is the Constant Geekery podcast with Dave and Pete. Actually, they probably wouldn't have said hello. It would have been good morning or good day.
This is awful.
Yeah, wow.
I hate my life. I basically question on a Tuesday morning as it is today, recording the podcast, one day later in the week, what on earth am I doing here?
You've only just started asking that.
Yeah. We've been working together for a long time, Pete.
It's nearly 10 years of actual professional working.
Only 10 years.
Obviously known each other a lot longer than that.
Felt like a lot longer, I'll be honest.
Well, you should have known. We've known each other probably about 20, and after 10 years of knowing me, you still thought it was a good idea to work with me. So.
I can't explain that. A moment of madness, I think. So, what are we going to talk about this week? It's basically one topic.
Yeah.
It's the M1 iPad. Do we love it or do we hate it?
Well, we's a very strong word, isn't it? Because only you've got one. So it's going to be more a case of, do you love it or do you hate it? And what is my opinion based on this is the first time I've seen it, and I must say it looks very different from mine.
Are you sure?
No.
You say that though, Pete, but it doesn't stop people who haven't even seen one in the flesh forming incredibly strong opinions about whether they love it or hate it, as is evidenced in the comments. And we'll perhaps talk about some of those a little bit later.
Yeah, I did see some of those. That'll be fun. So, I did watch your video on the main channel.
Thank you.
youtube.com/constant geekery. So it's worth checking that out if you haven't. If you want an unbiased, sensible review of the new M1 iPad Pro, then I'd recommend it. It's actually quite good, especially if you don't, just listen to it, basically.
It's a good review, delivered in my usual effusive, animated, shouty style.
Extrovert.
That describes me, very well.
Definitely.
Just going to take a slurp of my drink here.
So you obviously ordered the M1 iPad as soon as it was announced. I've decided to hold off, which we can perhaps talk about at the end. But I was interested in the issues that you found. Let's start with the issues, and then we'll talk about the things you like about it, and I can have my comment on that.
Yeah, we'll come to our conclusions, I guess, at the end. But things that could make you hate it.
That's normally a good place to put conclusions, by the way.
Yeah. Well, not everybody does. I have to be honest. The what? Come on, Dave. You can't have pauses on a podcast because people might just be listening, and if you are listening. It's nice to have you with us. If you're watching, then you'll see that Dave is desperately thinking whether we should cut this and start again. And you can see that on youtube.com/the Constant Geekery podcast. There you go. I got it in. Come on, compose yourself, man. Yeah, sometimes my brain just sort of stops working. A lot of reviews up, and a lot of the reviews, as always, went up in a very short space of time from receiving the iPad. I took 3 days to put mine up, and of course that costs us in terms of YouTube views and subs and all the rest of it, but how can you form a coherent opinion and have investigated everything in such a short space of time? I mean, these guys must just unbox it and sit in front of the camera straight away. So unsurprisingly, a lot of reviews on YouTube are very excitable about this M1 iPad, and I perhaps am not quite so excited about it because there are, as you pointed out, issues. So let's start with the shadow that runs around the screen.
Yeah, so show it to me, because I actually haven't seen this in the flesh yet. So I want to just see if it's as bad as he's making out. Because the old iPads had this, didn't they?
They did, but the reason why they had it is because and you'll see it on cheaper tablets as well, is because the screen is further away from the glass.
Yeah.
So the light sort of gets trapped in the edges and you end up with a shadow. So this only happens on the 12.9-inch iPad, which has the new Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display. Okay. So what I'm going to do, Pete,
Yeah.
And we'll need to commentate on this, obviously, for the benefit of those listening on their favourite podcast platform of choice.
Yep.
But I'm just going to put up a white screen. I'm going to turn the brightness up to maximum for the purpose of this. But in fairness, you don't need to have it on maximum to see it.
I can see it from here, and I'm at an angle.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I have to say, it's not quite as bad as when you described it to me. And it's not quite as bad as the first few generations of iPad where, like you say, the glass and the screen there was a distance between them. But it is noticeable. It's kind of, it kind of has that sort of cheap LCD television look. And I suspect a lot of people probably wouldn't notice it. But in a screen of supposedly this greatness, it does seem like a...
Well, the simple truth is, Pete, there isn't a difference between this screen and that screen in your iPad there. The difference is only in the backlighting.
Yeah, but that's part of the screen.
Well, yes, it is part of the screen, but I think, you could get carried away with it. It is a backlighting difference. And as I tried to sort of get across in the review, I think for a lot of people in the way they use their iPad, the XDR display won't give them a benefit. When you put this side by side... this is the third generation that you've got here, and I've also got that third generation. When you put them side by side for just everyday usage, the main difference is this flipping shadow around the side of the screen on the new one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they look pretty much identical. When it comes to HDR content, however, you can see the difference, but we'll come to that in a bit.
Okay.
So, I think the shadow is an issue, and I'm not convinced it can be sorted out by software updates. People have been saying the new iPadOS 14.6 fixed it. Well, I've installed 14.6 and
it has not.
It has not.
Well, if it's a hardware issue with the physical backlighting at the edges, no amount of software updates are going to fix it.
No, quite. And it begs the question, and we will. Actually, that's the wrong phrase, as someone pointed out the other day. Begs the question. I'm probably using that wrong. It raises the question: what are Apple thinking? Why are they releasing something? Are you telling me that Apple's display engineers didn't spot that? So somebody saw that in the shadow around the screen, and they sat around a table, and then they said to themselves, "You know what? That's okay. We're going to tolerate that."
It does make you wonder what the thought process was there. Was it rushed? Was it overlooked in the design phases, and it was too expensive to undo?
It makes me sort of think, would Steve Jobs have allowed it? And I know that phrase gets trotted out all the time. Steve Jobs wouldn't have let this happen. Steve Jobs is rolling in his grave, blah, blah, blah. But he did hold Apple's engineers to a higher standard. And this feels like a compromiser, that'll do kind of approach. And it's just a little bit of shadow around the edge of the screen. Is it going to affect anybody's use of the device? Absolutely not. You're going to be able to use it, but it's just an irritation. To someone who's worked in design, I notice things like that, and it irritates me. It's
one of those things that once someone's pointed it out to you, if you haven't noticed it yourself, you can't unsee it. And particularly, we'll get to who this is aimed at, but you've got to think with the Pro moniker and the XDR screen being touted for all its, high dynamic range and that kind of thing, you would think that sort of thing is going to get noticed by the person that does elect to buy one of these. And it's going to irritate the pants off them.
It will. It will.
Yeah. So, okay, what about... I had a question for you. Moving on from the shadow, do you get any bloom?
Yeah, you do.
Can you show me?
Can I show you?
Can you show me? I'm curious.
Could.
So for those that don't know, while Dave's setting that up, bloom is where you basically have a little bit of light spillage because whatever it is you might be drawing, let's say I'll get Dave to draw a thin white line on a black background on the iPad. The line is thinner than the surrounding pixels, LEDs. So you get spillage. So I'm just going to look across and Dave will commentate while I look for the bloom.
Okay, so I've just drawn a white line across a black screen and Pete is now looking to see the bloom. I'll give you a clue. If you look at it at an angle, you're going to spot it straight away. And the way this works is, as Pete was explaining, because the pixels are smaller than the LEDs, so in order for it to light up that white line on the black background, inevitably, some of the space around it on the screen is going to light up as well, and you can sort of see it as a kind of purple glow around. In fact, if I turn the brightness up to max, you might be able to see it a bit easier. I can definitely see it now.
I can see it. It's not quite as bad as I feared it might be. No, I'll be honest.
That's why I didn't include it in the review, because I think it's quite an extreme case. If you're an artist and you're drawing light on dark backgrounds with the brightness turned up to max, then yeah, it's probably going to irritate you. In HDR content, though, I actually think it makes it more real, because that's the way the human eye perceives light. We see a bloom around it, we see glow around it, so it doesn't bother me. And all displays do this. It's just that the previous display, because it had fewer LEDs, and it's more consistent across the screen, so the bloom is much wider and it diffuses, so you don't notice it.
Yeah, and I have to say, we make jokes about my age and my eyesight and all that kind of thing. I do wear contact lenses. I am short-sighted.
And you are old.
And I am old, apparently. But like any system, hi-fi, any system, it's only as good as its weakest link. And if you wear glasses, if you wear contact lenses, as I do, you are going to get aberrations from that, depending on how tired your eyes are. So there's only a degree to which that sort of thing isn't going to get affected by other things. Even the studio lights in here will probably be doing something with my contact lenses to make things glow in a different way from how you perceive them.
Yeah, and I'm sure your perception is completely different. I mean, you were probably born when there was just black and white available, and you've had to learn how to see colour.
Sepia, actually.
Sepia.
Yeah.
Good. Let's move on to another issue.
Thunderbolt.
So I was so excited to hear the iPad was coming with Thunderbolt, but at the same time, my excitement was tempered because the experience on the M1 Max has not been a true Thunderbolt experience, shall we say?
No,
compared to previous Intel Macs, for example.
I would go as far as to say, and some might comment on this in the comments, which is where you would comment, is in the comments. I'd go as far as to say the Thunderbolt port speeds on the M1 generation devices have been proper toilet.
That is a good way of putting it, yeah. And some things just plain don't work when it comes to Thunderbolt. Primarily, though, it's the USB function. So USB-C drives don't work as fast on the M1 Macs as they do on Intel Macs or on PCs. In all of my testing, now if this is, whether you're using something like a Samsung T5, which is a SATA-based hard drive in a USB enclosure, or a Samsung T7, which is an NVMe drive in a USB enclosure, you find that you're losing performance. Actually, I haven't personally tested the T7, but I've got an Orico.
It's similar to the T7, isn't it?
Yeah, but that does run 25% slower, and so does the Samsung T5 on the M1 Mac. I haven't done any in-depth testing on the iPad yet, but in the light testing that I've done, it's still slow. And the previous generation that you've got that has the USB-C ports is really slow. If you try to use it, and the file system is
so you are getting
you
are getting an increase in performance.
I think it is quicker, but this is a bit anecdotal at the moment.
Yeah, so you need to do some testing. But I think the thing is, when you're shelling out what you have for the new iPad Pro with the Thunderbolt, you want to utilise the full performance of your peripherals.
Yeah, but some people are saying, and again, I haven't personally tested it yet. I'm in the process of getting that organised. But some people are saying that they're seeing Thunderbolt speeds that are half and even worse.
Yes, which is not good. I suppose there is a ray of light, though, on this, which is there does seem to be indicators that this only happens for some drives.
For the USB, yeah.
And that it may be down to drivers. And it's logical to assume that if it is down to drivers, it will be the same drivers on the M1 Max as it is on the M1 iPad, and that in due course, software updates will fix some of these issues. Is that reasonable?
I think for the USB drive speed, yes. There are certain chipsets where the drives do run at the proper speed on the M1. So that would suggest a driver issue. iPad OS is built on Mac OS. It's the same core.
Yep.
So hence your statement about it being the same drivers. So I suspect if it gets fixed on the M1 Max, it will be fixed on the iPad. Thunderbolt is slightly different. And I haven't done the testing. I'm just working on what I'm seeing in the news media and the tech media. I know that I have tested Thunderbolt on the M1 Mac, and it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
It works, but it also doesn't work in some cases. My audio interface will not work at all on the M1.
Really? What audio interface is that?
So that's it's quite an upmarket one. It's the Antelope interface. I say it doesn't work at all. It does work. It works via USB. Unfortunately, the interface has USB and Thunderbolt, but if you try to run it over Thunderbolt, it doesn't work, despite the software being there and everything else.
So your Antelope doesn't work? That's staggering.
Oh, really? This just gets worse. Every week it's getting worse.
Everyone loves my dad jokes, or at least a small proportion of people love my dad jokes.
Yeah, don't encourage him, folks. He'll just keep doing it. So we'll do some more testing. I've got a Thunderbolt dock coming today. The new Razer Thunderbolt dock is what I have purchased for myself.
Okay.
And I'm interested to test that. I'm going to try it out with a few different Thunderbolt accessories and things on both the M1 Mac and on the iPad, and we'll see what happens.
How many ports has that dock got on it?
It has quite a few. So you connect it via the Thunderbolt on the front of the dock. I think it's then got headphones, then an SD card reader, which is great. I think on the back then you've got some USBs, Ethernet, and 3 more Thunderbolt ports.
3 more Thunderbolt ports.
So you can have 3 times the bandwidth, Pete.
No, you can't.
No, you can't.
No. Because it's still going into that one.
Yeah, that's it.
Pointing at it.
Yeah. You're always limited by that one connection to the iPad. And if it's not running at the right speed, then that's probably going to be quite a miserable experience. But until I've tested it, we don't know. I'm just supposing. We shall see. So
one of the things we spotted on the MacBook Air with the M1 in it is that the Wi-Fi performance wasn't as good as the Intel equivalents.
We did spot that.
Have you noticed anything with the Wi-Fi on this one?
I haven't tested it.
Okay.
I could do a test today, actually, here in the office, because we actually have some fast internet. We took quite a lot of heat for that. And lots of people suggested we didn't know what we were doing or how to set up Wi-Fi networks. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Just been doing it for 25 years.
We know nothing.
The issue with it is that it was slightly slower than an equivalent Intel machine with Wi-Fi, and that was consistent. We could test that. We weren't testing it on the very latest Wi-Fi standard because we don't have the very latest Wi-Fi standard, and I'm not going to go out and buy a load of kit and rewire our office and set it all up for just to please a few commenters on YouTube. That's not how it works.
Unless they want to, sponsor that.
Unless they want to sponsor it. I thought it was a fair comparison because it's the kind of Wi-Fi that most people would have at home in their routers, same standards.
Yeah.
And what we found was it ran slightly slower. But you've got to be clear here. We've got a 1 gigabit internet connection here, and over the Wi-Fi, it depends where you are in the building as to how much of that 1 gigabit you get. I say we have 1 gigabit is shared in the whole business estate, but you can get, up to sort of 500 megabits on download over Wi-Fi on your Intel Mac. But on the M1 Mac, we weren't getting up to that kind of level. So is that a problem? Well, my internet connection at home runs at about 50 megabits. So no, it's not a problem. And of course, if you're transferring files by Wi-Fi, then you're going to see a difference. But we don't really often do that.
No, and I think, it's a lot of that balance, isn't it, between real-world use and actually what it's capable of. I guess, again, it comes back to something we'll talk about later, but depending on what you're using this for and where you're using it and what your infrastructure around you is, you may be disappointed if you're trying to, hit the throttle to max on some of these things.
Yeah, I think people get carried away. It's the same with benchmarks and things, isn't it? They're desperate to have that extra number, that extra bit of performance, because they think they're missing out if they don't have it. And the simple truth is they don't get anywhere near that level of performance in their everyday use anyway, so they don't need it. And the same is true of Wi-Fi. When you're browsing the web or sending an email, you don't use a lot of bandwidth. Even if you're streaming 4K HDR content, you're still not getting up to the kind of levels of bandwidth that we were testing. So
it's just human nature, though. I remember in the 90s, I was into mountain biking. It was a sort of growing sport in the early 90s into the mid 90s, and there was this massive focus on how light your mountain bike could be. It was all about weight. Can you get your bike down? Can you shave a few grams here? If you get different brake calipers, can you save off 10 grams here, or this or that or the other? And some people were even going to the point of putting helium in their tyres, that kind of craziness, yeah. Until it eventually got to the point where people realised, particularly on the mountain bike, you make it too light, things are going to break when you actually use the mountain bike. But I remember reading an article in a magazine once. Do you remember magazines? Magazines were what we used to have before the internet. And someone was it was a reader had written in saying, I'm not quite sure what to do here about, should I trim this here and get this component here because it will save me another 25 grams on my 18-pound mountain bike. And I remember someone saying, getting a lightweight bike is good, but, when you're getting down to that level, get a haircut or have a poo. That's kind of... There are other things to think about.
So true.
Or lose some weight, just lose a few pounds, and you'll be surprised how much different that makes. And I think it's a human thing. We chase the numbers because it's almost bragging rights without actually looking at, does that actually make any real world difference to me?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So I'm not going to go to great lengths to test the Wi-Fi on this tablet because I've not noticed any issues with it. And honestly, I suspect it's more than fast enough for everything that I do and everything that most people will do. So our final issue to discuss is the RAM. So the previous generation, so this particular iPad here, this has got about 3.5 gigs of RAM in. And I think the fourth generation added some more RAM, but I can't remember how much. But there's a bit more in the fourth generation one. And the standard new M1 iPad has got 8 gigabytes in. So this is already an unprecedented amount of RAM that's more than double the third generation iPad.
Yep.
And you can also have it with 16 gigs of RAM.
I've got RAM Envy because, you got that in there. And I've got a MacBook Air with 8 gig.
Yeah. You do also have a 16-inch MacBook Pro before anyone gets out the violins as well,
that's true.
To weep for Pete.
That's true.
So if you want that 16 gigs of RAM, and we've not even covered whether or not you need 16 gigs of RAM in an iPad, but if you want the 16 gigs of RAM, it's only available if you buy the model with 1 terabyte of storage. Now, most people don't need 1 terabyte of storage on their iPad, or indeed
ever,
yeah.
on their device.
Yeah.
That's such old hat now. It's all about portable, isn't it? It's all about your drives and your cloud and all that kind of malarkey.
Well, let's do a little experiment, Pete. I mean, you're a heavy iPad user. How much space have you used on your iPad? And I believe that is a 256 gig model.
Let's by all means check that out. It is a 256 gig model. Would you like to know how much? Of course you would. You've just asked me.
Yeah.
46.3 gig.
Yeah. So, which is similar to my experience. Occasionally higher whilst I'm working on something, and then, and I suspect that's true for most people because we're not keeping massive archives of videos and things anymore. Most of that stuff is cloud saved and or on external storage. So I think for most people, 128 gigs would actually be enough. But common wisdom is get double what you think you need.
Yeah.
So hence why I said 256. And going to 256 adds £100 or $100 to the price. I think that's a sensible price to pay to double your storage.
It's good value.
Yeah. However,
if you've got it,
going from that 256 to the 1 terabyte, and people are only going to do this surely if they have a desperate need for that much storage, and I don't know who that is, or if they want 16 gigs of RAM.
They are only going to do it for that. I would say that I've never had many people wandering around to me saying, "Gee, I wish I'd gone for..." Because they did do a 1 terabyte before, didn't they? I really wish I'd gone for the 1 terabyte because I'm just, I'm full.
I've never heard that.
No. maybe I'm wrong. Comment if you have used up all your terabyte, if you've indeed got an iPad with a terabyte of storage.
I don't doubt that there are some people out there who do need it, but I think they are a minority. So just the cost difference. To get that extra, okay, you're getting the storage, you're getting an extra, my brain's not working, 700 and something, 750-ish gigs of additional storage.
746.
44.
Yes. Hey, we know tech.
And math, it would seem.
Yeah.
Excellent.
744 gigabytes.
It won't be, though, of course, because formatted capacity is different. But in any case, you get that and you're getting an extra 8 gigs of RAM, and that is costing you, in the UK, £549.
And do you know what you can get for that?
I do.
You can get a whole iPad Air.
Well, not quite. I think there's 579 in it.
Oh, yeah, but you've got to allow for formatting.
I suspect if you were to go onto Amazon, you could probably find an iPad Air for less than 550 quid.
Of course, then you need a case and a keyboard. But you get the point. Comms to comms down, more or less.
But let's just analyse that for a moment. You're getting... It doesn't cost more to make the chassis of the iPad Pro over the iPad Air. They're essentially identical. The screen will be the same screen that's in... Is it the same? No, it's not. It's because it's a 60 hertz model.
I don't know. You keep asking me these things on the podcast, and I then either have to nod sagely and think you're right, or look like a doofus and say I don't know because you haven't given me a time to.
Well, I apologise for that, but I can tell you because I have an iPad. Well, my wife has an iPad Air, and I reviewed it on the channel. That the display looks every bit as good as the one in the iPad Pro, but it is 60 hertz, not 120.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're using the pencil, if you're an artist, you might notice the difference. I can't really.
It's less painful on the Air because there's less hertz. I'm sorry. I can't stop. It's a problem.
Anyway, you've got a screen. You've got the A14 chip in there. You've got memory. You've got storage. You've got all of the stuff that makes an iPad an iPad.
And you can choose a different colour.
All for that 550. And when you compare that then to the cost of putting in an extra 8 gigs of RAM and a slightly bigger SSD, bearing in mind you can go out and buy a 1 terabyte SSD from Samsung of the very best NVMe type for, I don't know, £120 maybe, £150, something like that. So this is Apple tax to the max, isn't it?
Can we turn on cynical mode?
Let's turn it. Engage cynical mode.
Cynical mode. That's a Red Dwarf reference for those that. Apple doesn't do things by accident, and one does wonder if they've deliberately made it this gap to sell more of the 1 terabyte models, because, as I said earlier, I doubt many people were buying them.
I think you're right. I don't think many people bought the 1 terabyte one, so putting in the memory upgrade instead of giving that as an option. Do you want 8 gigs or 16 gigs? So stick it in with the 1 terabyte, makes people pay for that upgrade.
Apple tax to the extreme.
Now, when it comes to RAM we're talking about this as an issue. When it comes to the RAM on the iPad, obviously 3.5 gigs is plenty, but what you'll notice is, and you will have noticed this, Pete, is when you're doing multitasking, you've got lots of things open, particularly if you've got Safari and you haven't used it for a while. When you come back to it, tabs need to reload.
Yeah.
And that's because iPadOS suspends things in the background to ensure minimal use of RAM. So I have noticed on this one you can have a lot more open, and when you switch between stuff, it's instant.
That's good.
So it is using that additional RAM, and you can see a marginal benefit. Is it worth 550? Probably not, because I suspect 8 gigabytes is enough to do what I've just described. I
would more than think so.
Yeah. So why did I go for it? Well, I was hedging my bets on Apple bringing out Pro apps for the iPad, the M1 iPad. And if they bring out Logic Pro, I would probably want 16 gigs of RAM, because I would use Logic Pro on an iPad, and I would want 16 gigs of RAM. I also think they'll bring Final Cut Pro, and whilst I probably wouldn't use Final Cut Pro on the iPad, if Apple do that, maybe DaVinci might bring out Resolve on the iPad, and then you would also want 16 gigs of RAM.
Blackmagic, I don't know if you listen to the main channel or the podcast, but he keeps dropping this hint. He desperately, desperately wants it. Please, for the love of Pete, can you just please do it?
Thanks. So we've talked enough about the issues anyway. Let's get on to the good things about the new iPad.
Yes.
So I'm going to start with the number one good thing. It's an iPad Pro.
Yes, and that is nothing to be sneezed at because it is definitively the best tablet out there.
Yeah, I'm sure Samsung fanboys would argue with us over this, but I've had some Samsung tablets. It's pointless having this argument with me because I've been there and I've done it, and the iPad Pro is just the pinnacle. I mean, the iPad is the best tablet all round. Yes, there are certain things that other things do better. Some things that iPad does worse. You can comment on Apple's taxes and pricing, and yeah, we accept all of that. That is all absolutely true. Apple rinse people for this stuff. However, put that to one side. Put to the side the fact that we really dislike Apple's corporate behavior and pricing strategies. Take the devices itself. The iPad is the best tablet, and the iPad Pro is the best version of the best tablet.
Yeah, definitely. And we've used a lot.
And nothing comes close now that it's got M1 in it. Although that's a bit of a kind of future, can't really see the benefits yet, I don't think. But in the future, that's going to be amazing. It shows where computing is going, and I think if you want to do your computing in this form factor, isn't it nice that you get the same choice that the laptop users get?
Yeah. I think that gives it levels the playing field, gives you equilibrium. So yes, notwithstanding our conclusions at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, okay, you got to pay extra for the pencil. If you want this Magic Keyboard, you've got to take out a small mortgage. Because it costs the same as the GDP of some small nations.
And you don't want to lose the pencil as well, because that could be very expensive, particularly if it then shows up again chewed, and you've already bought another one. But you're much more careful with your stuff, aren't you? So you're not going to lose it.
I am more careful with my stuff, but because there's nothing to protect the pencil on this, it keeps coming off. The magnet's not strong enough. When you're carrying it around, it's very easy to knock the pencil off. And if you're listening to the podcast instead of watching it on YouTube, and there's nothing wrong with that, you won't be able to see the fact that I'm knocking my pencil around on my iPad, but you might be able to hear those noises. It comes off easy anyway. That's the point. I quite often pull that out of my bag and find that the pencil is not with the iPad anymore.
One day I'm going to bring one of my dogs to the office and just see what happens. Or I could just swap them when he's not looking.
Yeah, I will notice, Pete.
For those that don't know, one of my Apple pencils, because I now have two, because I lost one for a while, did get chewed by one of my dogs. It still works, but it looks like someone's been really thoughtful when they've been writing with it, or stressed.
It's gross. Like when you used to borrow a big pen from someone, and it's obviously spent a lot of time in their
mouth.
jaw.
Not socially acceptable in these pandemic days.
Mm-hmm. No. Did you pick up any other good things that you liked from looking at the video? I know you haven't played with the tablet.
I really liked your comments on Centre Stage. I can see that being useful for all manner of things, particularly when it brings support for Zoom and other apps. I did have to chortle about the potential for, it's going to happen. There's going to be videos going up of when Centre Stage goes wrong. In fact, I wanted to do a skit for the podcast, but we just don't have time today, where we were demonstrating that, and it's focusing on Dave, and then I just walk in picking him a nose, and it kind of comes in. But maybe for another day.
Yeah. Well, if you want to see us demoing that is in the video that went up on the main channel yesterday. And even Tom makes an appearance, which is first. Actually, no, it's not the first time he's made an appearance in one of my videos. He has appeared before. Maybe a little pop quiz there. Can you name the video that Tom appeared in previously?
And we won't send you a Chromebook if you get it right.
No. Although Yari, I hope I'm saying your name right, it has received his Chromebook. It's gone all the way to the northern part of America. That is to say Canada.
Okay, Canada
land. And it went via DHL.
And it got there.
They picked it up on the Thursday, and it was with him yesterday. So we've spent a lot of time moaning about logistics company on this.
That's pretty good, actually.
Pretty good. And it wasn't excessive either. It cost £50. I think that's pretty reasonable for what it was.
Enjoy, Yari.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm sure you'll put it to good use. And we're quite happy as well that it is going to get put to good use. So it would have been fun to explode it or do something else, but I'm not a fan of wasting technology for the sake of it. I'd like it to be used if at all possible.
Definitely.
And final good thing about this iPad Pro?
Well, it's got to be the XDR display, which I've not seen it in full action. You did that sword video on your channel the other day. I'd like to, because apparently you have to see it with your own eyes. You know, YouTube does all sorts of things to videos when it uploads them, so you're not going to see the true thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look over while Dave plays this, and Dave can add a commentary, and I'll give my opinion in a moment. Ready?
Okay, so I'm just going to play. I'll skip to the end of the video. You can watch it all afterwards. But this bit of the swords. So if you haven't seen this video, it's some guys forging swords, and then at the end you've got this really shiny sword and sat on a rack with a lot of light at the top. And I think that what you can't see when you compare these things on YouTube is the realism that it brings to it. And it's more like being in the room with what's happening. It's that good.
Yeah, that is a step above. It's the sort of thing that you don't know you're missing until you've seen it. It's a bit like when you go into they're rapidly disappearing now, but I went into a department store the other day and went into the electrical section with all the big TVs, and they've obviously got demos similar to that running to show off devices to their full power, and you look at it and you think, my telly doesn't look as good as that, even though it's a perfectly good telly, and I never think that, but it's again one of those things that you only realise when you see it. But that is a fantastic display. I can't fault that if you've got the right content that you're watching on it.
Yeah, and that is the key. It's all about the content. What I should have done for the video I did is do a side by side of the Fire shot, because that really shows the difference between the two tablets. Because anybody who's watched a bonfire going, you know that in the middle you'll get brighter bits, then darker bits. And of course, on a display that's evenly backlit, it's very difficult to really bring that to life. However, this can do it, and it gives a much more real look to it. So I think if you're interested in HDR content, then it's good. And it's up to you to decide whether or not you would run out and upgrade. I'd probably suggest, if restrictions are letting you do it, is to go to an Apple store and see one in the flesh.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say they're on major back order now, aren't they? These iPads. I don't know what the current delivery time frame is.
And also remember, it's only the 12.9 that gets the XDR.
It is, yeah.
So again, kind of a bit of a Apple tax there if you want that top display, but there is nothing wrong with the one below it as well, just for the sake of equilibrium.
Yeah, if you don't need that display, you won't be unhappy. When has anyone been unhappy with the iPad Pro display? I mean, it's fantastic.
It's brilliant.
So how about some comments? There's a couple of comments that I wanted to highlight that came on the main channel. People who've got really quite strong opinions about the iPad, and it's partly the opinions that they're presenting and partly the way they're presenting it, and also this idea that because they don't understand why a product might work for people, because it doesn't work for them for whatever reason, they feel that they need to laugh at others who are look down on others.
Everyone else is wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, a good example of how I could do that is I do have a desktop machine, but I never use it. Okay, but you have a desktop machine that you use all the time. Now, I respect that. I don't use that. My workflow doesn't fit that. I don't feel the need for it. I don't want it. But I don't laugh at you or insist that somehow you're wrong because of that, apart from if we're having a little bit of a laugh. But, I don't hold that view. And it does seem that some people think that, it's the same with everything, though, isn't it? It's the same with cars. Some people will say, if you haven't got an electric car, then why would you possibly ever want a combustion engine, or vice versa? There's all these opinions based on people's own use case, and sometimes you've got to look outside that. And I guess that's what we try and do on this channel, is think of others.
Yeah. So let's highlight a couple of comments and look at what's being said, what people think about it. I think it's fairly clear that some of these comments came without actually watching the video. But someone's saying that the device doesn't know what it is. which I fundamentally disagree with. We're well into this era now of tablets that become laptops, that these kind of hybrid devices, and Apple are not the only people producing these things. We were both Surface Pro users, Surface Pro 3 and 4 we had, which is the definitive, if you like, tablet that turns into a computer.
Kindle Fire.
Actually, did I have? No, I've never had a Kindle. I had Tesco Huddles for the boys, and I spent my life replacing the USB ports on them. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway, he then says it's too big to be a portable tablet and it's too small to be a MacBook Pro. Well, it's got the same M1 chip as the MacBook Pro in the same size as the MacBook Pro. I realise there are other arguments to that. Too big to be a portable tablet, Pete? Do you have problems lugging your 12.9 around?
No, I've started using it a lot more since going back to being out and about, because it is so much more portable than a laptop. And it's not just that; it's all the bits and pieces you'd need to take with, or I like to take with my laptop. Whereas you can take this and it's got everything with it, so it is portable.
It's good. And if you're using the pencil as well, because I have also the iPad Mini, and I have an old Apple Pencil which I use with it, but I never write on it. It's just too small. Yeah. Doesn't have the OS to be a MacBook Pro, but has a keyboard the size and the screen size of a MacBook Air. Well, they're two different devices, and I think it'd be kind of interesting to see Mac OS on an iPad type device.
I was going to say it doesn't have the OS to be a MacBook Pro yet,
but this makes the assumption that you want a MacBook Pro, not an iPad. But what if you want an iPad, not a MacBook Pro?
Yeah.
And you want iPad OS?
Yeah, there's plenty of people that want that.
Yeah, because the OS is, does make a difference to the way that you work. But take, for example, we'll come back to this a few times, haven't we? My video editing machine at home, which I bought, instead of going for a Mac, I went for a PC. And one of the primary reasons I did that, not that I don't like Windows or I'm unhappy using Windows, but the main app that I'm using on it is DaVinci Resolve, and which fills the screen completely.
It's completely agnostic to which operating system you're on.
It looks identical. It really does. So what does it matter what OS? It doesn't. And I think the same is true then for certain apps as well. If someone wants to use LumaFusion, for instance, as their video editing app of choice, I think you can run that on the M1 laptop, but it's designed for quick editing on an iPad, and it's brilliant for that. So there are, he's asking what's the market. I assume it's a he, might be a she. What's the market for it? People who don't want a MacBook Air but want a MacBook Air in secret. No, the market for it is people who want a large iPad with a pencil.
Why would someone want a MacBook Air in secret?
I don't know.
It's like, are they ashamed of their MacBook Air? Mine's lovely in gold. I'm quite proud of it.
And he's talking about it being a transitional product, moving, that Apple are planning to move people to MacBook Air with a touchscreen. I don't think Apple are planning to do that at all. It's not going to happen.
Oh, that's really? No.
What? Look,
no.
You got to think about this logically. It doesn't matter what consumers want. What matters is how Apple can make more money. And by not having a touchscreen on the Mac, people will buy iPads, and that makes Apple more money. So,
and as we've established before, I don't want a laptop with a touchscreen on it. I do not want it. It's bad enough. Yeah, don't get me started on that. But yeah, and last week in the podcast, we failed to mention something that we normally mention in connection with Apple money.
Let's not go there.
Let's not go there. But that pension fund isn't going to keep topping itself up. Let's just say that.
I actually have a laptop with a touchscreen, but do you know how many times I've used the touchscreen?
I would guess never, because I would imagine if you had used it, all I would hear about is the fingerprints on your touchscreen on your laptop.
I'd have to clean it afterwards. Yeah.
Oh, it would drive me insane. His laptop and his finger would drive me insane.
So I'm coming back to this comment. I totally respect the opinion. You're welcome to have your opinion, and that's your. I totally get that it doesn't make sense to you, which is why I responded with, I think it's not for everyone. This doesn't make sense for everyone. And I didn't like the big iPad when it was first released, but it's grown on me. I try to present the reviews based on experience, and I try to be as balanced as possible, because I recognise, and we've said this before, I recognise that people will go out and spend their hard-earned cash based on what people say in their reviews on YouTube. So I don't want to be responsible for someone wasting their money.
And it is fair to say that you and I often don't see eye to eye on devices and applications and how we use things. I mean, the desktop versus laptop is a good example. I've always favoured a larger laptop. You've always been inclined towards a smaller one. I think I was the one going for let's get the big iPads originally. And gradually you've come round and, you've brought me round to things. So we do have different opinions, and we do try and blend those opinions to give you, a mix. But there are other opinions out there as well. So we're just trying to give a balanced opinion so that you can make a choice, as you say, with your hard-earned cash.
Yeah, and I think it's fairly evident from this as well that people don't like the iPad Pro. They don't see it. I mean, it's obviously people are talking about the 12.9 inch, I assume. But it is the same size as the screen is the same size as the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. I don't think it. I don't understand the point. That's
actually something I quite like about it, because I use both equally when I'm out and about now. As you say, I've got my 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is still my device of choice until a bigger form factor comes along. But I am using the MacBook Air more now because the fans don't come on, which is quite nice because there aren't any. And it is quite nice because you're not suddenly going from a 13-inch screen up to a 16-inch screen. It actually does take a while to recalibrate. It feels quite seamless.
Yeah, excellent. So another comment that I sort of picked out. I mean, lots of people were really happy about the new iPad. They've made the purchase and they're happy with it. Some people are not happy about the display issues. Some people are glad that they're waiting. Lots of people waiting on WWDC, it would seem. And we had quite a lengthy comment from one person, and I'd like to break that down a little bit. He's saying, if we're in the market for a new tablet, why would you complain about having a more powerful iPad compared with the 2020 model, especially as it's the same price? Well, I didn't complain about it. I certainly wouldn't be maxing out the performance, but it's great to have it and will future-proof your device for 5+ years. Yeah, absolutely, it is future-proof. This complaint, didn't make a complaint, about too much power seems copycat YouTube influencer negativity. So let me just correct you there. I don't watch any reviews before I put up my own review. So I'm not influenced by what other people say. I always venture my own opinion, an honest opinion as I see it.
Can I just say, obviously I do very little on the main channel, but I do read the comments, and one of the sort of regular things I see is how much people appreciate that your reviews, your videos aren't like everyone else's, and that's why they like you. Well, I say like in a strong...
break out the air quotes, Pete. We're going to need to put that on a T-shirt.
You really need to put that on a T-shirt.
He says
deploy air quotes.
Air quotes deployed. I don't get people complaining about too much power, especially as it has efficiency cores for solid battery life. Well, again, I wasn't complaining about too much power. My comment was that we can't currently use all of the power easily, so something else needs to come. So it is definitely something for the future. I think I made that quite clear in everything I've said about it. Solid battery life with efficiency cores, that is true, although it should be said, and I don't think I did cover this in the review, the battery doesn't last as long on the M1 iPad as it does on the A12 iPad.
Does it not?
No, but I don't think there's much in it. I haven't done in-depth testing myself yet.
Well, stone the crows.
He spoke about the camera position.
Don't get me started on the camera position.
So, our issue with this is the camera is at the top of the iPad when it's portrait, which makes sense, I think, for smaller iPads, because a lot of people would use a smaller iPad in portrait mode. And I'm holding this up in portrait to the camera. Of course, you won't be able to see that if you're listening to the audio. And the camera is sort of top center at the top of the iPad as you hold it in portrait. But of course, most people would actually use a device like this in landscape mode. And if you put it on the Magic Keyboard, it's landscape.
Yeah.
And your Logitech keyboard is also landscape. So now the camera's off to the left-hand side, and that's a little bit annoying. So that's the comment that I made in the review. I understand why Apple have designed it the way they have. I don't think there's anything that will stop them from putting a camera in the top.
No.
Having a magnet there for the pencil, well, they can move that if they wanted to. So there are ways to do it. He says it's he doesn't. I don't think he cares if people appear to be looking at him or not. And this is that. I don't like it personally. When I'm video conferencing, I want to see people looking at me. He's staring off into the distance. But you do. You've got to stare at. I mean, we do quite a bit of presenting and training over video, so we've gotten quite used to that whole staring down the barrel of the lens thing to help the audience really feel like you're engaging with them. And that can't happen if the camera's off to the side.
Have you ever had it when, you know, there's some people who won't look you in the eye when they're having a conversation with you face to face? I'm not leading up to a joke here. It is off-putting because you don't know how sincere they are. Why is it? I mean, some people do it because there's a degree of social anxiety and they find it really difficult. So I know a few people like that. But it does make it very hard to really read that person. And obviously, you've got enough challenges to reading people when you're doing video conferencing. You know, Zoom fatigue and all that kind of thing's been well documented over the last year. So eye contact, or at least the appearance of eye contact, is so important in trying to maintain some kind of human connection on that. So I think it is a problem. And it for me, there's been plenty of times where it's like, I'd love to just rock up on a sofa and have a video call with my iPad. But I can't because I'm not comfortable with that stupid camera position, so I have to go and get the MacBook Air out or the MacBook Pro out.
Or take it off the case and put it in portrait mode.
Yeah, which is awkward. You know, and we had, do you remember the Dell XPSs we have?
Oh, the nostril cam. What possessed them to do that, to put the camera at the bottom of the screen?
Oh, it's crazy. It is not flattering. I've not seen anyone look good on that. Even good-looking people like yourself just don't look good on that.
Thank you very much. I would reciprocate, but I feel like you were fishing for a compliment.
No.
He talks about the Thunderbolt being a logical move. I totally agree with that. It is a logical move, especially if it's on the M1 Mac. Why would you not include it? And it's better than USB in theory. So even if it doesn't add much value, it's an upgrade. It's worthy to be included. Don't quite agree with that. If you say something is Thunderbolt, people expect Thunderbolt. And if it's not delivering Thunderbolt performance, then that's a problem. If it was a faster USB port, you know, which they could have done because the USB port on the previous model didn't run anywhere close to the speed that USB 3.1 is capable of, that 10 gigabits a second. So, yeah, I don't know. Some people are saying that the Thunderbolt is not running much faster than 25% of its performance, which would put it bang on par with USB-C. I don't personally think that's acceptable. I think if you're going to shout about adding Thunderbolt to something, then make sure it works.
I think particularly in view of how that comment goes on to talk about, I am skipping slightly, but it's talking about, you know, seeing the future possibility of the power of a machine like this. Well, if you're not utilising all that power, and obviously we'll talk about software in a minute in our conclusions, but if the Thunderbolt is not giving the performance, then you're not really seeing the power of it, are you not?
Correct. Yeah. So he made some other points as well. Where time is progressing. I think I agree with some of the things that are being said. And at the end of the day, these are just opinions, and everybody's entitled to form their own opinion, and we're entitled to have our opinion. And this is just nice debate. I think it was, you know, it's useful to know what people are thinking and to come back with some of our thoughts as well. It gives a nice rounded picture of the whole thing.
Yeah. So keep them coming. We don't mind them coming.
Yeah.
But we will sometimes disagree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to get on to our conclusions about this device. And you described it when we spoke earlier in a particular way that I thought was quite appropriate.
I can't actually, because I'm old, I can't actually remember what that was.
Well,
give me a little
there
hint.
was a particular word that you used, and the hint, Pete, is on your notes, which are right in front of you on your iPad screen.
It does feel unfinished.
Unfinished.
Yeah, it feels like a product that hasn't been fully realised yet.
I suppose that was a little bit the same with the M1 Max when they released those. But when you think about software and hardware work together, you know, you can have a great piece of hardware, but if there's no software support, an example of this is if you're desperate to use Final Cut Pro, you can have the best PC in the world. running Windows. But if it doesn't run Final Cut Pro, that's completely irrelevant to you.
Yeah.
So the software that you want to use is important, and the hardware needs to go with that software.
Yes.
So announcing a piece of hardware without announcing the software that's going to make use of that additional hardware.
And this is the bit that I'm really confused about. The new iPad Pro was announced, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you've only got it in the last few days. People are only, real people, not reviewers and what have you, are only just getting them back end of May. So WWDC has been announced. It's June the 7th. It's a week or two away. Why not wait and announce the hardware with inevitably the software that is going to need to come to make real use of the M1 in this in this iPad, sorry, because you used the analogy on your video of it being like looking in the donut store and not being able to go into the donut store, just being able to lick the glass, which I have seen you do on occasions.
Well, sometimes when you're desperate.
Low calorie.
It's ultimately unsatisfying, though, isn't it? It's like, do you remember the very early days of sugar-free drinks, where you would take I don't mean diet here, I mean the zeros, and you would take a mouthful of this and you got all this flavour and then you swallow it and it's just gone, like it was never there in the first place. You just can't access and that's what it feels like. I know there's a massive amount of computing power inside this iPad, but I can't get to it with the software that's available at the moment.
It's a bit like having a high-performance car in the UK. You've got all this performance, but there's no way you can use it. But what Apple, we think, are going to do at WWDC is give everyone a Nürburgring that they can spin round.
That'd be good. It's got to have a reason to exist. And the reason why we're saying these things, we're not complaining. Again, I've got to say that we're not complaining about having an M1 in an iPad is absolutely brilliant. But we want to have some software so that we can take advantage of that additional performance. Because the simple truth is, there won't have been a single time, Pete, I'll wager, where you've been using your A12X based iPad Pro where you've sat down and thought, "Oh, this is a bit slow. This is a bit sluggish."
I was doing some modelling of the universe for the next 2 billion years, and there was a point where it chugged slightly.
Okay.
And some of the weather mapping I'm doing for the Met Office, sometimes runs a little bit slow, but, you just leave it to do its thing. So, yeah, but no.
No. So if you don't want to spend your hard-earned cash on one of these expensive new iPad Pros, there will shortly be probably quite a selection of third generation and fourth generation iPad Pros available on the used market, and you will not be disappointed with those either. Everything that we've said really about this iPad, apart from the features that are specific to it, will apply to all iPads. The iPad Pros are fantastic machines.
Yeah, definitely. So I got a question for you then. Obviously, you've got this to review. If you'd have bought it with your own money, how would you feel about the purchase? As it stands, forget what might come at WWDC.
Right, so I mean, okay, so first of all, this was a business purchase, and you and I own the business. So technically, half of it at least was my money, and half of it was your money, which is always very gratifying. We also
I haven't told you what I bought the other day yet.
Yeah, I look forward to that. We do have the benefit, of course, of the tax because it's because I use it for work, so I can get the VAT back in the UK. We can offset it against our corporation tax. So you bear these things in mind. It's easy to look at guys like us who are reviewing all of this stuff, and we're getting it at a more cost-effective price, and we're using it for the business, and that's a different rationale perhaps to consumers, which is probably most of our subscriber base.
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong there, but I suspect most of our subscriber base are consumers who wouldn't make the same purchase choices as us because the finances are different.
Yeah.
Put all of that aside, if I had to take the money out of my own personal pocket money account, assuming I had enough in there to do it.
If you saved for many, many years.
How would I feel about it? Honestly, I'd be gutted, Pete. I would be gutted because this was expensive, as anyone can look up the price on the 1 terabyte iPad Pro. And it's not that much better in everyday use. It's not that much better than the previous generation that I already have. The biggest thing that made a difference, and again, watch the Magic Keyboard review on the main channel if you want to see that, is this keyboard. That's putting my existing iPad onto this keyboard made a huge difference and really changed my iPad experience. So I know there's a load of arguments about the price of this as well, but put that to one side.
That felt like a better value upgrade than the actual iPad itself.
Yeah.
And we did talk about both getting one so that we could sort of share our thoughts on that. And I'm holding off. I want to see what WWDC brings. And I think probably that would be based on what you've told me, based on watching your video. And I felt gutted for you watching that video because I was so excited about this M1. I think my recommendation would be, if you're umming and ahhing about this, wait and see what WWDC brings, because it may be you can be happy with one of these 3rd or 4th generation iPad Pros. They'll do everything that you want and you can save yourself a bucket of cash.
You can if you buy used. Just to be clear, they're not that much more expensive.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I mean, used.
Yeah. So if you were buying a new one anyway, then you get all of the M1 stuff, and that's brilliant. So when I say I was gutted, I knew going into this that this was a gamble, and that
you took one for the team.
Yeah, I knew the M1 chip wouldn't be, there isn't going to be software to use it, and I said as much in the videos prior. So I knew that was coming. I just think it was the shadow around the display which I saw the moment I switched it on, because it was very evident on that grey background that comes up when you first switch your iPad on. The display as well, I'm used to using the OLED display on my Razer laptop, which is very vibrant, much more vibrant than the standard iPad display. So I was kind of expecting that the mini LED would be the same, and it's not. I'm putting them side by side and I can't see much difference until you play the HDR content. So that was a bit of a downer. The Thunderbolt port looks like that's a bit of a downer. Center stage, yeah, that's great. But those are the main features that we're getting. So I sort of felt, this is a huge amount of money to spend. And yes, I wanted to review it on the channel, but the income that comes from the channel is in no way going to get anywhere close to covering the cost of the device. So I've got to live with it, and I've got to make use of it.
Unless we get some air quote deployed T-shirts out for sale, yeah, I think then we'll be absolutely rolling in it.
There's an idea. So if you'd like to see some merch, then let us know, and we maybe start thinking about that. Yeah, our audio recorder is saying 1 hour and 5 minutes, Pete. And
yeah,
Tom's sat in front of us looking quite depressed because he's got to sift through all of this now.
And you're probably getting quite depressed just listening to it as well. So maybe we ought to wrap up here. We did mention WWDC. We've kind of got some thoughts on that.
We thought we might do a live stream. So if you would like to watch WWDC's keynote with us, then let us know in the comments section, and we will look at maybe doing that. It'll be our first go at it, and it will probably be an absolute disaster. But join us for that disaster.
You won't regret it, but we may. Yeah. So I guess that probably wraps it up for now then. So
it does. Yeah, we'd love to know what you think about the iPad. Is it a love it or hate it? We didn't even answer the question, Pete. Do we love it or hate it? I'm afraid to say that I sit right in the middle. I love some of it and I hate other bits of it.
Straddling the uncomfortable fence of indecision.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm doing. What about yourself? What do you think?
I can't say whether I love it or hate it not having got one. I do feel relief that I haven't got one yet.
Interesting.
So we'll see what changes, if anything, at WWDC.
June the 7th. Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks everyone for joining us for what's been quite a long podcast with possibly a bit of rants. Please don't take it personally, folks. We're just...
I have to live with that. Well, I don't live with it, but I have to work with it. And on that note, cheerio.
Cheerio.